This is Welcome everybody. This is the Fertility Europe online event, which is part of the European Fertility Week 2022. The theme of this event is the same as the theme of the week, which is 25 million journeys, one fertility challenge. My name is Satu and I am the General Director of Fertility Europe. Let's have a very quick and short overview of the agenda before we start. If I can change my slide. Oh, yes. So we will have two sessions. And after the first session, we'll have a Q&A. And then after the second session, we also have a Q&A for the speakers. All of you online who are online can write your questions and comments to the speakers on Q&A. Please mention to whom your questions are addressed to. And then after the second session, you can still address your questions to all speakers. But first, I'd like to invite our wonderful host, MEP Bartosz Arłukowicz, who will open this event. And then our office manager, Anita, will give us a short translation of Mr. Arłukowicz's speech. Mr. Arłukowicz.
Bardzo dziękuję za zaproszenie. Bardzo dziękuję za zaproszenie i za to, że mogę uczestniczyć w tym spotkaniu.
I'm very pleased. Thank you very much for your invitation, and I'm very pleased that I can participate with you again.
Temat in vitro jest mi szczególnie bliski, zajmuję się nim od bardzo wielu lat.
In vitro is the subject very close to my heart. I've been dealing with it for many, many years.
Po pierwsze, jestem lekarzem.
First of all, I am a medical doctor.
Po drugie, jestem byłym ministrem zdrowia w Polsce.
Secondly, I'm ex-Minister of Health in Poland.
I teraz pracuję w Parlamencie Europejskim w Komisji Zdrowia i Ochrony Środowiska.
And now I work for the European Parliament in the Health and Environment Commission.
Problemy ludzi borykających się z niepłodnością są mi szczególnie bliskie.
The problems of people dealing with infertility are very close to me.
Tylko w Polsce około 2 milionów ludzi boryka się z tym problemem.
As only in Poland, it's about 2 million people that struggle with this issue.
Dlatego zróżnicowane podejście w Europie do tematu in vitro wymaga naszych dyskusji.
So such a diversification of approach to this issue in Europe really needs a proper discussion.
Bo w naszej wspólnocie europejskiej mamy regiony, w których in vitro jest w pełni dostępne.
Because in European Union there are regions, there are countries where IVF is accessible.
Mamy regiony w Europie, w których pojawiają się propozycje, między innymi takie, żeby karać ludzi, którzy chcą skorzystać z procedury in vitro.
But there are places in Europe where there are ideas to penalize people who want to use fertility treatments.
Wszyscy wiemy, że in vitro jest metodą leczenia niepłodności.
We all know that IVF is a method of treating infertility.
Wszyscy pamiętamy doktora Edwardsa i Nagrodę Nobla, którą otrzymał za wynalezienie metody in vitro.
We all remember Dr. Edwards and his Nobel Prize for inventing this method.
Dlatego musimy robić wszystko, aby dostęp do tej metody był równy i powszechny w Europie.
So we have to do everything that the access to this method is equal in the whole Europe.
Kiedy byłem ministrem zdrowia w Polsce,
when I was Minister of Health in Poland,
prowadziłem specjalny program.
I have introduced reimbursement program.
Specjalny program finansowania procedury in vitro dla wszystkich tych, których na to nie było stać.
The program that could finance IVF procedure for all those who could not afford it.
Tego programu w ciągu 3 lat
this program, in 3 years of its functioning,
urodziło się ponad 22 000 zdrowych, szczęśliwych dzieci.
Made over 22,000 happy, healthy children.
Dzisiaj w Polsce program in vitro został zakończony przez aktualny rząd.
But today in Poland, there is no reimbursement and the current government stopped this funding.
Dlatego chcę obiecać publicznie, rozmawiając z państwem,
so I would like to publicly promise here, talking to you,
że zrobię wszystko, żeby w całej Europie dostęp do metody in vitro był równy i powszechny.
That I will do all that's in my powers to make IVF and fertility treatment available in the whole Europe.
Zawsze możecie Państwo na mnie liczyć.
You can always count on me.
Zawsze pomogę pacjentom, lekarzom i instytucjom publicznym, które będą promowały metodę in vitro.
I will always help the patients, the medical world, and the institutions that will help promote this efficient method.
Życzę wszystkim owocnych obrad, dobrych wniosków i realizacji założonych celów.
Have a good meeting and successful outcomes from this meeting.
Pozdrawiam Państwa serdecznie.
Best regards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arłukowicz, for your very important words and for your support and hosting this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, next we'll hear the message from Fertility Europe by the chair, Claudia Kordic. Claudia.
Unmuted. Hello, my name is Claudia Kordic and I'm the chair of Fertility Europe. In the name of Fertility Europe, I would once again say thank you to MEP Arłukowicz for hosting this roundtable, but also thank you for the audience here. And at this stage, and thank you for all the partners who made this whole event and the European Fertility Week as such possible. As you might know, this whole event is part of the European Fertility Week. This is our 7th European Fertility Week. It's growing. And the European Fertility Week is actually reaching to various interest groups, stakeholders, media, thousands of individuals all over Europe. Our members associations, some of them might have their own events in their countries and are supported by Fertility Europe, which is very important to us, not to have only an online event, but also to have national events in the countries. As I said, we would like once more to say thanks to the supporters that make this event possible. But why, and as Mr. Arłukowicz said, why is this so important to talk about this topic? It's 1 in 5 in some countries in Europe, almost 1 in 6 people who struggle with fertility issues in the reproductive age. Over 25 million people within the EU struggle with fertility issues. It's 8 million babies born only until 2018 solely from IVF. So the number is increasing, the number of people looking for medical assistance in order to try to get pregnant. It was in 2018 when 215 babies were born after MAR treatments in European countries. And the percentage of children born after medical assisted reproduction per natal birth is almost 10%. So this is why we are here, and this is why this topic is so important, and this is why we are discussing this at this roundtable discussion. And now I would like to again wish all of us a fruitful and successful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much. And it's time to start the presentation. So our first speaker is a patient representative. Bojana is from Croatia, and she will tell us about the invisible journey. Bojana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Bojana Šantić. I'm from Croatia. And this is the first time actually that I'll be speaking as a patient and not as an organization representative. I'll be speaking about my infertility journey that involved the need to travel abroad for gamete donation, as well as some aspects of infertility that drew my attention during this journey, and some that are still traveling with me today. Well, the story starts with the fact that each and every day we are around you. It's the person crossing the street beside you. It's your colleague. It's your next door neighbor. Or maybe it's even a member of your family. People dealing with infertility are present, but the chances are you are not aware of it as they remain in silence. Most of them are reaching for in-state treatment with a health system they're well familiar with, often assisted by peer-to-peer support they can find in their immediate environment, while juggling their infertility treatments with their working hours and the rhythm of everyday life. which is of course never easy. But there is another group dealing with infertility. They need to travel abroad for treatment. Most of them are not recognized or included in any relevant statistics. Most of them travel for treatment without their state health system knowing about it. Their infertility journeys remain invisible. And there's thousands and thousands of those travelers in the EU. I'm one of them. For me, this is infertility. I can't explain that feeling better. After hearing the diagnosis, premature ovarian failure in my 20s, I was completely in the dark. Yes, thankfully there are advances in medicine, and yes, there are fulfilled lives without children. Yes, there are options. But the diagnosis hits you like a train and leaves you dazed and numb for years, sometimes even a lifetime. I was going through infertility treatments for 5 years without success, after which followed another 5 years being at first childless, then child-free, embracing, surrendering to what is. Meeting my current partner led me to rethink gamete donation. The only possible option, I was left in my 30s to be able to give birth, was IVF treatment with donated reproductive cells, egg cells from another woman. Although the mere existence of this medical procedure was a cure for my diagnosis and promised high success rates, I spent days and months talking and rethinking all consequences this procedure would bring in our lives, as well as the lives of our potential children. And there's a lot to talk about in the need for a third person's biological material as part of helping conceiving. Embracing the unconventional took time and courage. While deciding on taking that huge step, we were facing an absurd situation. Croatian law on MAR allows and determines in detail all aspects of gamete donation, but the state gamete bank defined by law, where all the donor cells as well as data would be collected and stored, is still not established in practice. We needed to travel abroad for treatment. Also, the Croatian law recognizes and defines as possible only non-anonymous donation, by which the rights of the child include the possibility of obtaining information on the donor when reaching adulthood. Unfortunately, the only treatment we could reach for abroad was an anonymous donation, which is practiced in most clinics open to foreign nationals, influenced by the fact that there are not enough non-anonymous donors. That was the hardest decision I needed to make, agreeing on the donor's anonymity or giving up treatment altogether. After deciding on gamete donation, inevitably follows the hard choice: where to go? Spain, Czech Republic, Greece, Portugal, to one of these most common destinations for European citizens? In the search for the optimal option and weighting the advantages and disadvantages of each destination, one actually comes to an indisputable fact. The precise information, for example, about the origin of the donor, is very scarce. The insight into success statistics is almost impossible, and the number of so-called packages in clinics is immeasurable. Those packages include either some kind of guarantee, or more often the illusion of a guarantee, or they aim to sum up all possible add-ons to the IVF procedure, sometimes including especially those whose effectiveness has not been scientifically confirmed. During the nights I spent online looking for a clinic, I could not escape the impression that I was being drawn into the construction of refined medical business and tourism, in the vortex of which is a mechanism that counts on your hope and emotion to make a decision for exactly that clinic in which you will pay for a very expensive procedure, mostly without any guarantee. As just an ordinary patient, in those moments, I would give anything for a little more accurate information and guidance that would give me security, instead of seemingly empty screens and beautiful clinic advertisements. Of course, the most important aspect is one of the donor-conceived child perspective and child rights. I realized that personally, I experienced such reluctance to accept donated gametes because of important questions. How would the child feel knowing about the anonymous donor? How would the child feel if it had the need to search for its biological roots? How would I tell and talk about those roots, knowing that, for example, YouTube is full of young adults who were donor-conceived and who bear witness to the trauma of learning about their origins too late? How would I help the child to face and fight the potential stigma? Do I have enough knowledge or resources for that important task? Well, to some of those questions, I'm still looking for the best answer. And to end this presentation in a more intimate tone, and the most intimate tone, this is a quite old photograph of my grandfather, after which one of my two sons is named after. He is sitting in grass next to our family house in my hometown, under the oak we called the family tree. My memory of this man and this long-gone atmosphere, no matter how ordinary and usual it may seem, well, it's just a random photo of poor quality you can find in any family album, actually was a tipping point for my decision on donation. My grandfather was passionate about gardening, and as I remember, when some plant didn't grow that year, he was teaching me a saying: it's a chance for a change. Prilika za promjenu on Croatian. So I took his word on that. It was a chance for a change. I was ready to embrace the unconventional, despite the general belief that blood is not water. And you know, especially in Southeastern Europe, blood is never water. Well, in my case, it turned out ultimately that blood is water, and that water brought life. Actually, 2 new lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bojana. Very touching story, and thank you for sharing it with us and doing it for the first time, as you said. Before we move on to Carlos, we would just like to show you the short video that we made for this week. So Anita, if you can show us the European Fertility Week video 2022. Do we see it? You just have to push play, probably.
25 million people in the European Union are affected by infertility. Their journeys are unpredictable, difficult, and unique. In many countries, people's sexual orientation, marital status, age, lifestyle, or fertility awareness can put them at a disadvantage. Europe's fragmented healthcare policies often fail to promote equitable access to safe, reliable, and effective fertility care. Inequity is not the only problem. Other external barriers include a lack of knowledge and action by a healthcare professional, lack of psychological support, social stigma, limited access to the right treatments, or financial constraints. A fertility journey can put a strain on relationships or negatively affect mental health. For some, The fertility journey does not have a clear end. Fertility can be challenging, but fertility care should not be. We need equal, fair, and safe access to treatment and public education on fertility. That is why government policies should address the many inequities in access to safe and effective fertility care.
Thank you, Anita. Next, we will hear the reproductive healthcare professional's point of view of the patient's journey. Carlos Callas Jorge is a professor at the Faculty of Medicine, director of the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology and Reproductive Medicine, as well as of the Center for Medically Assisted Procreation at the Northern Lisbon Hospital Center. He is one of the fertility specialists and pioneers in Portugal and has over 30 years of experience in this area alone, and over 45 years in obstetrics and gynecology. Carlos is also the chair of ESHRE. Carlos.
Thank you very much, Satu. I'll try to share my screen now. Okay, I hope you can see it.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So thank you for the invitation. As Satu said, I have a long journey as a physician in this area. And it's my pleasure to be with you and to share with you some reflections. Of course, it's my own perspective. I'm not representing any group or any organization. In spite of being the current chair of ESHRE, I'm speaking just for myself today. And also, one limitation of my experience, of course, is the reality of my country, where I live. The legal and public funding, framing specific practical situations are, of course, different among countries. I must say that it's not easy to participate in someone else's journey. And I'm very, very pleased to have the opportunity to heard the presentation, the previous presentation that represents the best of a description of a difficult journey. But the couples are completely different. Well, for starting, a couple is a group of two persons with different perspectives in life and different perspectives about their own issue, infertility issue. So the relationship patient-clinician or couple-clinician is completely different. And after thousands of patients or couples, I realized that I cannot summarize this difficult topic in unless by talking in general things. So I decided to identify some landmarks in the process of the patients and professionals' journey, of course. Initial evaluation, the first treatment, the following treatments when we have no success, and finally, when and why is it at the end for those that have not been successful previously. So initial evaluation. Of course, the diagnosis of infertility is easy one, and it's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the explanations of the possible causes or absence, if even more difficult to understand by the general patients, of course, the absence of an evident cause for the infertility. The therapeutical proposals after reaching etiological diagnosis or an absence of it. The explanations of the possible prognosis, and here in the therapeutical proposals, I include also other therapeutical processes than not ART, or including in medical assisted reproductive techniques, because medical assisted reproduction techniques include also surgery, ovulation induction, and other non-ART techniques or options. And the discussion of the prognosis, it's always a very difficult task. The patients, of course, have their expectations, sometimes unrealistic expectations, and moving to ART again, some of them because of the I would say non-correct information that surrounds this area in the news, not only fake news, but not completely true news. So the prognosis is something difficult to address, and the patient, when we say that you have 30% of potential success rate, of course they translate it as I'm in one of the 30%. So it's always difficult to be clear to the patients, not being too much negative and creating unnecessary anxiety or negative feelings. When we move to the first treatment, of course, we have to address and help. And I'm again talking of my reflections and my professional life, because that depends how the group is organized, if there is different division of tasks that goes, many of the instructions are performed by other professionals, not the clinicians. But in my reality, patients like to hear the clinicians to explain as much as possible, in spite of course, all the help of other professionals. So even the management, the injections, the timing, the potential side effects, everything of those explanations comes under this management topic. Of course, the result of the treatment, if it is positive, it's a success to everyone. And I must say that after so many years working in this area, I still, in any negative result, ask myself if I have done everything I could in the right way, in the most perfect way. So this is, I would say, a parallel journey that I have with my patients. So a negative result is, of course, a difficult moment, some kind of mourning moments, but most of the patients have the opportunity or the strength enough to come to discuss options for the future. That can be to move to another treatment, other strategy, or if we are in the ART process, to go for a new treatment cycle. And again, in a new treatment cycle, we have again the same topics. Now the management is easier because there is not the fear of the unknown. but the expectations are more intense, in my experience at least. So again, the result, positive, happiness for all of us, and I include me in the group, for all of us, for the patients and for myself. Negative result, more deep discussion about alternatives for the future. And it's here more, I would say, more intense, the pressure to anything else. And that's where we need to be clear and to explain clearly the meaning of all the many add-ons that are in the world, and the scientific basis or non-scientific basis behind everything that is advertised as the best to get the final result. And my last landmark, the end of the process, and the end of the process can be a decision. And I have had many patients in the past that decided that, okay, it's the end. I recognize that I have done everything that I wanted to do, and that's it. Unfortunately, most of the patients have a huge frustration because they have no further public funding for the treatments, or they have no more own money to continue in the private setting. In Portugal, we have more or less 40% of treatments in public institutions and 60% in private centers. Some part of the frustration can be originated by practical difficulties in getting gamete donation, because we have, it's legal in Portugal, we have a strong private practice in this area, but in public institutions, it's very residual. So the frustration is again in this area for people that are not, cannot afford the private treatment. Some people accept and realize that it's maybe the end of a troubled journey, and they can base their future life with more peace. For some of them, I must say that some people, in my experience, has already transmitted the idea that it is a relief for them to give up to all the frustrations, expectations not fulfilled. So it's quite difficult topic. It's a very diversified topic to participate in a patient journey. But I must say that is one of the best things in my life, is to try to help people, and if possible, to help people. So as final remarks, counseling and giving support to infertility patients, infertile patients during their journey is the task of a whole team, but however, clinician roles is crucial. Scientific and clinical soundness must be a main pillar to treat human beings. And of course, all the process needs empathy, respect, transparency, coherence, I would say, compassion in a mandatory way. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Carlos. It's from the patient's perspective, it's always nice to hear, well, nice to hear that also the doctors feel the disappointment with the patients. Thank you very much. Next, infertility has a significant impact to the patient's mental health during the journey. We know that. It is important that support for that is also offered to all who need it. Mariana Moura Ramos is accredited clinical and health psychologist and psychotherapist in the Coimbra Hospital and University Center in Portugal, and a researcher at the University of Coimbra. She's currently the head of the clinical psychology unit of the Coimbra Hospital and University Center, and she will now tell us about the patient's experiences. Mariana.
Let me share my screen. I think you are already.
Perfect.
Yes, great. So first of all, thank you, Fertility Europe, for inviting me to celebrate this 2022 Fertility Week. It's a pleasure to be here with you. The name of this session is perfect from my point of view. Couldn't be more appropriate, because indeed it's very important to know that infertile patients are not a homogeneous group of people that share the same experience along the time. So it's very important that we address the specific needs of each patient and each couple, and to adjust our policies, our fertility care to these specific experiences that patients undergo in this period. I could talk an hour or two about the psychological aspects of infertile patients, because of course is a field of several very, very different and very important experiences, but I only have like 10 minutes, so I've tried to summarize the main aspects of the psychological experience of the patients. And I think the first thing that we have to bear in mind is the important idea that infertility and medically assisted reproduction goes beyond the approach of a medical issue. The psychological dimension of this experience is really, really important. At the end of the day, it's one of the biggest markers of all this experience. And this is because infertility blocks something that is not just physical health, it's a major life goal for almost everyone. Not everyone, absolutely, but for most people, that is parenthood. So because it blocks this major goal, it affects several areas of patients or people's domains that are embedded in the importance of parenthood. So when someone faces infertility, this impacts the individual identity, because mother and father, motherhood and fatherhood are really, really a central key issue to the personal identity. Couple functioning is always also affected, because having a child could be central for lots of couples. And what I mean by this is that couples, some couples do believe that having a child is a central issue. It's like the gold standard of the couple. So the couple functioning and couple life could be affected by the experience of infertility. And there is also this social dimension that is affected by the experience of infertility, because parenthood also has a social role. We have main roles in our life that are dedicated with social issues that go around the motherhood and fatherhood aspects. So being childless has an impact on the social bonding and social identity and social relationships. So infertility invades several areas of couples and women's and men's life, and because it's a chronic issue, because it stands a long time within the life of the person, it may affect seriously the way that couples and patients live throughout this experience. And we have heard it doesn't really end, because it goes beyond reproductive age, because being childless is something that could go on with your living. So infertility indeed affects several areas of people's lives, and this could even have symptoms of anxiety, of depression, and other mental health problems that can seriously affect infertile couples. A different thing is the impact of assisted reproduction. Infertility experience is more like an identity issue, but when people start doing assisted reproductive treatments, there are different psychological aspects that affect this period of life. Infertility is in this most chronic issue because it takes longer, and usually assisted reproductive is a specific moment of life. Of course, it can take a lot of time, but it's more focused on specific periods of life, and usually is experienced as a roller coaster of emotions, because when couples start assisted reproductive treatments, usually they face this period and this experience with excitement and enthusiasm, but also some disappointment, some frustration, some anxiety, and even some grief when the treatment is unsuccessful. So it's being like in this roller coaster of emotions that are very, very difficult to deal with. Usually patients try to do something. It's like they try to control their emotions. They try to adjust their expectations. They try to not feel so excited because they want to be prepared for the unsuccessful treatment. But this is something that is very, very difficult to do because we are not really in the condition of controlling our emotions. So this makes this period very difficult to deal with. Another thing that happens usually during the assisted reproductive treatment is the feeling of lack of control. During the infertility, and specifically in assisted reproductive treatments, couples feel that they are not in control of their life. It's difficult to make plans. It's difficult to make plans for the next month because they don't know whether they are going to start treatment or when, and it's difficult to make plans in the long term, to change employment, to do some specialization, to move house, to accept other responsibilities, because the future is so unknown and so difficult to control that it affects even not just the present moment, but even the future. There's also an important impact on the couples that we shouldn't forget. We know that this is the most obvious situation. There's a short-term impact in the sexual relationship of the couples because sexual relations start to be directed to get pregnant. So these are affected in this period. But there is a very, very important impact on the couple functioning and the couple relationship. We must bear in mind that infertility is a dyadic stressor, something that affects both members of the couple. We have already other stressors. So for example, if we think about disease or unemployment or something that affects one person, this is something that can affect, of course, the couple way of functioning. But when we are dealing with something that affects both equally, that is really really affecting each person way of feeling and each person way of relating with other people, it's easy to understand that both couple members are being affected, and because of that, they are probably feeling negative emotions about this experience. So it's more difficult for them to be able to deal with their own negative emotions, and then at the same time to be able to take care of the other, to support the other, because he's struggling, each person is struggling with the same difficulty, even if in different ways. Professor Kalajar said that there are two people that are different, so they are dealing with this issue differently. So we are asking them to deal with this and then to be able to support the partner And this is very, very difficult for couples. Although we know that we are used to discuss the negative impact of infertility, and main idea of this session today is that each journey is different. And we know that there is a great variability in the patient's experience. And in some situations, this is a good news. And what do I mean by saying, what do I mean by saying that this is a good news? Because the way that the people really experience infertility and medical assisted reproduction are very, very linked with specific aspects and specific representations of each person and each couple. So if we say that, for example, infertility is affected by these identity issues, couple functioning and social functioning, because these are different for everyone. For some people, this identity will be more important. For others, it will be less important. For some people, social bonding will probably be linked with other issues. So this is going to affect the way that people react and people cope with infertility. And it will make these experiences unique and different between each person and each couple. We even have the experience that some people say that having had the experience of infertility had a positive effect because it made possible to have new meanings about life or about relationships. We also know that some couples reported that having had this experience brought them together, because all the work that the couples have to do within their relationship to deal and to cope with this experience, usually all this work makes them being more together, being better at communicating, being better at sharing experiences, being better at listening to the partner needs. So indeed, we know that in some situations, this experience can be positively experienced. What makes it different here sometimes is the existence of some emotional skills. I think this word is quite problematic because I don't want to be saying that we have good emotional skills or bad emotional skills, but sometimes this experience make patients and couples work on specific skills that they have to deal with emotional experience, acceptance, resilience, sharing their needs, sharing their concerns. These kind of skills or capacities are important to improve the way that couples and patients have to deal with these issues. But we cannot do this all by ourselves. And in some situations, patients and couples will benefit from having support from someone, usually a psychologist or a counselor, to enhance this kind of capabilities and to help patients navigating through the infertility experience. And this can be helpful not only for the unsuccessful journey, and that means when I'm talking about unsuccessful, I'm meaning about the one that doesn't end up with the children born, but can also be helpful in dealing with a successful journey, because this journey has a negative impact along the way. So sometimes it's important to deal with this negative impact that comes upon. So my take-home message, my final remarks, is that infertility is an emotional challenge experience for most patients and couples. Indeed, it's a surprising challenge, something that appears that is usually unexpected and usually has these negative consequences. There is great variability in the adjustment to this experience, and some patients will be negatively affected, but some can have this positive experience. We call this the post-traumatic growth. that is the growth that occurs after a very negative experience and that can be experienced positively. And to be patients, couples should be offered the possibility of having psychological support to help them navigating through this experience and develop or enhance these capabilities of dealing with infertility. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you very much. It is now time for Q&A. Very short ones until we continue with the second session, and then, like I said, you can ask your questions in the end for all the participants or all those who are presenting here, except unfortunately Kate. She has to leave after her part. So, questions. I have one question for Bojana. What would be your advice for someone in a similar situation where you were when you started your gamete treatments, donated gamete treatments?
When I started, or
when you were considering and starting to think about the treatments?
Well, a lot of good advice I got from a UK organization, Donor Conception Network. They have a great, a terrific library. And I think that's the best library I could find in the EU. If someone has it also, it's not in English. I know, Sato, that in Scandinavia, there's a lot of material on donation, but it's not in English, so it was a problem for me. So the UK material, that organization that exists for, I think, more than 30 years now, has a terrific library and books. They can be ordered online. I took some great advice from those books. They were written by psychologists, and it's a very valuable material.
So basically what you are suggesting, to find as much material as possible to get familiar with the issue.
Yes, because in my opinion, all the people in same situation, they are dealing with basically same questions. Of course, they will not come to the same answers, obviously. But the questions are similar, and the material is scarce for now. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That was a very good advice. I have another question for Carlos.
Yes.
The one who is asking says, in my home country, it is often the physician who is dragging the patient from one unsuccessful treatment to another, telling them you just have to be patient, or as long as there is one egg, there is hope. Instead of taking over the role of the counselor, giving them advice about alternative ways on their path. What would you suggest to change this attitude, and what do you think is different to that in Portugal?
Thank you for the question. Of course, it's not easy to say, to give a general idea, because in some patients, in some situations, in fact, the best option is to repeat the treatment, because we know that the cumulative rate, success rate increases. But individually, in each situation, we need to balance if it is time to go to some kind of donation, if it is possible, but that depends on the legal and practical frame in each country, or if there is room for any additional technique that has not really proved success for only the general situations or the general patients, but of course there are some subpopulations that can benefit from some small modifications. So it's an individual decision based on each situation. I cannot give counsel for a general position. Just to do clinic as detailed and as individualized, as personalized as possible. That's the only idea I can give you.
So basically not saying that just try and it will happen, because it doesn't happen
because of course we have a cumulative success rate that is known, but how far to stress this possibility or to be realistic, that's an individual. But I must say that, of course, you know, the patients are individual persons, the couples are two persons, but the professionals are still persons. So they have their own way of thinking. The most important part is not to use the power that the professionals have over the situation. We need to be humble. We need to be honest. That's my position.
Yes, that sounds very good. Then there's one question to Mariana. Should all the patients get psychological support at the start of treatment, or should everybody get offered psychological advice?
In my view, everyone should be offered the possibility of being referred to psychologists. This is not saying that everyone needs a psychologist. It's not true that everyone needs a psychologist, but it's true that this experience is very challenging. Not the same challenge for everyone. So for some people could be challenging in the beginning. For some people could be challenging the decision of going, for example, for a donation. For some people can be challenging for example, to decide about ending treatment. So we don't have this one fits all possibility, but because we know that this is a very challenging experience, people should be offered the possibility of having counseling. And also, because there is not all centers have psychologists there, I think it's important that health professionals are trained to identify main difficulties that couples may present, because sometimes the couples have difficulty in identifying that they need the counseling because they don't want to speak a lot about their infertility, or because they are afraid of starting discussing these issues with a partner. So it's important that healthcare professionals are more aware of what are the signs that couples do present when they are facing this difficulty.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. It comes in different stages for each individual. And like you said, sometimes people don't even realize that they really need to discuss it with a professional. But it's tricky, and I'm sure Carlos can tell us how tricky it is to find the right place to talk about it. Thank you, Mariana. I think we will now move on to the next session. We are now inviting Kate from FNUK. This session is dedicated to two patient voices. The first speaker is Kate Bryan from Fertility Network UK, which is a fertility patient association. Oh, I will stop sharing my screen so Kate can step in. Kate has been associated with the association for more than 20 years, first joining the charity as a trustee in the late 1990s and now works as operations manager. Kate is passionate about supporting everyone affected by fertility issues and ensuring their views are always heard and taken into consideration. She will now tell us about the fertility funding in UK from the patient's perspective. Kate. Kate, you are muted. And when you are unmuting yourself, just to tell you that Kate has to leave after her presentation, so we will have questions for her right after her presentation.
Right, I hope you can see
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. And thank you all so much for inviting me to be here. It's really, really lovely to be joining you today and a great honour. I'm going to be talking to you a bit about fertility funding in the UK, which in theory we ought to have good funding because after all we are the birthplace of IVF in the UK, but unfortunately our funding is incredibly complicated. So I'm just going to talk to you a bit about how it works here. Oh, sorry. Pressing the wrong thing there. So it ought to be simple because in the UK we have NICE, and NICE is the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and NICE decides what kind of treatments are cost effective in the UK. It's actually looked at fertility treatments twice, once in 2013, once in 2004, and it's now about to look at it again. So in theory, the fact that we have NICE, which makes recommendations about treatment, should be a good thing. So NICE looks at all kinds of different things, not just at fertility treatment, and it makes evidence-based recommendations. And those are developed by independent committees. And on those committees, they have professionals from all relevant spheres, they have specialist advisors, and they have lay members as well. And NICE looks at clinical effectiveness, so it takes expert advice, it searches for all the relevant papers on a subject, and then analyses the quality of that evidence to produce effective clinical treatments and recommends what the NHS, our National Health Service, should then provide free of charge to patients. But it also looks at cost effectiveness, which is the other really important part of what NICE does. So it looks at quality of life improvements through a health economic lens. So when NICE recommends something, you can be sure that that's clinically effective and cost effective. And in most other areas of healthcare, these NICE guidelines are followed very carefully. They're recognised as being the gold standard. And you see people fighting to get NICE to recommend certain drugs for things like cancers because they know that once NICE recommends them, that says that they work and it says that they're cost effective. So for IVF, for fertility patients, NICE recommends 3 full cycles of IVF for women of 39 and under, and 1 full cycle for a limited group of women who are 40 to 42. And to qualify in the older age range, you should not have had treatment before, and you need to also have a good ovarian reserve. So that's not for everyone, but that's what NICE recommends. So what happens in reality? Well, one of the problems in the UK is that we have an internal market within our healthcare system. So we have purchasers and providers, and the providers are the people who actually provide healthcare services, so hospitals, fertility clinics, local trusts, and the purchasers are the people who buy them. And the purchasers are arranged locally, so decisions about how to buy healthcare services are made locally. Actually in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, they tend to purchase as a nation, so they do it as one country, but it's not the same in England. And in England, the situation is constantly changing. So we used to have something called primary care trusts purchasing healthcare. That was then taken over by clinical commissioning groups. And now we have something called integrated care systems. So every time the system changes, there are often huge fluxes in terms of what's offered in terms of fertility treatment. What we find is that when local commissioners are looking at places to save money, IVF is often a very easy thing to cut. And one of the reasons, I think, is because fertility patients are often so distressed by their experience that they're not the sort of people who are going to be outside with a banner waving it about saying, you need to reinstate funding for this treatment. They often find it difficult to talk about. So I think that's one of the reasons that we often see commissioners saying, oh, fertility problems are a lifestyle choice. This isn't really a medical condition. So it's a constant battle when it comes to fertility funding. So we'll look at the devolved nations first, that's Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and what they fund. So in the UK, if you're going to have a fertility problem, you want to live in Scotland. In Scotland, they provide the 3 full cycles for women under 40 and the 1 for older women who are eligible. Wales is not quite as good, but still you get 2 full cycles if you're under 40 and the 1 for older women. In Northern Ireland, they don't actually fund a full cycle at all. They offer one fresh and one frozen cycle. So of those places, you can see that Scotland is the best, then Wales, then Northern Ireland. And then we come to England. As you can see from this map, the rest of the UK is a bit of a mess. Now, what this map actually shows is the percentage of IVF cycles that are funded by the National Health Service locally. It's a little bit out of date because this is HFEA data, and the data from the HFEA tends to date back a couple of years by the time they produce it, but it does summarise very effectively the problem. So you can see that in the east of England, only 20% of IVF is NHS funded. But if you look at the northeast of England, it's 56%, which is actually nearly as good as Scotland. But the figures actually disguise a much more complicated problem. So if you look at London, for example, where you see that 23% is funded, it actually depends on where you live in London. So it's not London as a whole that gets 23% funded. It's completely different. And it actually depends which side of the river you live in and which part of London you live in. So I live in southeast London. Where I live, I would get one cycle. If I lived in northeast London, I would get 3 full cycles. And this is why people find it so difficult in the UK, because there's such a difference depending on where you live, with such a total postcode lottery. And what we've seen recently with changes to the healthcare system is some areas have been looking at fertility funding because areas have been joined together in the new way of the NHS working in England. So we've got bigger areas commissioning treatment now. And some of them have looked again at their fertility policies because they're different in the different areas and tried to adopt one across the board. Now, in North Central London, when they did this, they were very thorough. They talked to patients, they talked to fertility specialists. They really tried to understand what fertility patients needed and why, and what the consequences of not funding treatment were. So we see there that the treatment is actually very good in North Central London. They're funding 6 transfers. In other areas, they've often already decided that they're going to cut fertility treatment before they start on any kind of consultation. And the consultation is often not what most people would recognise as a consultation. So, for example, in one area recently that we were in touch with, they were doing a SWOT analysis, which is where you kind of look at the costs and benefits and the pluses and minuses of offering something. And they had listed as a benefit of not offering any fertility treatment at all, which was what they were looking at. They had said it would be good not to offer any treatment. It was a potential benefit because it meant patients wouldn't have to go through unsuccessful treatment if it didn't work. They wouldn't have to endure the pain of unsuccessful treatment. I mean, can you imagine anyone saying that about any other medical condition? Oh, it's better that we don't offer treatment so that patients don't have to go through the upset of it not working. But it's not just the number of cycles or transfers. And actually that in itself is an issue because NICE was very clear about what a full cycle of treatment was. It was the fresh cycle and then also the transfer of any frozen embryos that were suitable for transfer. But a lot of areas we've seen have made up their own definition of a full cycle and say that it's one fresh and one frozen cycle, which isn't quite the same thing. Anyone with secondary infertility won't get NHS funding. Another area that has caused a lot of problem is where someone has a child from a previous relationship. And we see this quite often where perhaps one partner has a grown-up child who doesn't live with the couple, but they can't access treatment because there is a child, one of them has a child from a previous relationship. They also have often used ovarian reserve as a cutoff, but not necessarily in a way that always makes clinical sense. So in some areas, we actually saw people not being able to access treatment because they had a very good ovarian reserve. And what they were doing was using NICE guidance, which explained how people might respond to treatment. And obviously people with PCOS with a very high ovarian reserve might be more likely to hyperstimulate. So they'd use that as a reason not to offer treatment to some people. Smoking is another one. BMI, usually people have to have a BMI, their body mass index, under a certain level to qualify. And one of the problems with this we see really often is that couples aren't told about this when they're referred to treatment. So they go through all the waiting and then finally get to see a specialist, think they're about to have IVF, only to be told that they've got to lose a lot of weight in order to qualify, which can then be really difficult to deal with. We also see some areas having their own age restrictions. So in some areas they have a cutoff at the age of 35 for treatment. And for single women, LGBT couples, there are often really complicated arrangements, and it does depend entirely on where you live, which is why we call it a postcode lottery. Although actually it's not where you live, it's where your GP's surgery is. So one thing we see quite often is people using a GP in a different area in order to try to qualify for IVF treatment. So we know that around 60% of IVF cycles in the UK are actually self-funded at the moment. People are paying themselves. And we've just done a big survey at Fertility Network of more than 1,300 patients and looked at how much they spend. So on average, patients were spending just under £14,000. But it was actually 12% who were paying around £30,000, with some spending up to £100,000 on fertility treatment. And it's not surprising that that same survey also showed 40% of patients have experienced suicidal feelings, because I think it demonstrates how difficult and upsetting this can be for patients, not only worrying about whether they need fertility treatment, but also about whether they can access it, and that then depending entirely on where they live in the UK. It's a very, very unfair system, and one that at Fertility Network UK we're constantly battling with. But thank you very much. Do get in touch if you'd like to afterwards. We're always very happy to hear from anyone, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Kate. We do know that the situation in UK is quite confusing, but this again showed it how confusing it is. It's just amazing, not amazing, but just horrible. We have questions for you here, if you can stay a few minutes with us. So one question is, do you think that these differences in reimbursements in UK has impact on overall success rates? And does it mean less children born than if there were proper funding, for example, for IVF treatments for all?
I'm not sure it would have an impact on success rates, but I think it does definitely have an impact on number of children born overall. And one of the things we saw recently with COVID, when clinics were shut for a while, was there was some research done at Aberdeen on the impact of those waiting times and what impact that might have on patients. And I think that we can see from that that some patients who are waiting a long time in our system and get stuck in the system, which really happens quite a lot now, that patients get stuck in the system, undoubtedly it is going to have an impact on their chances of having a baby, because people are getting older while they're waiting. And that's, as you all know only too well, that's one of the really painful things about all this, is the kind of awareness of your biological clock while you're on a waiting list.
Yeah. And then I have two questions about basically same thing, but the other one is, what English patients do with underfunding? Are they pushed to go abroad when regulations are not as good as the UK, but treatment cheaper possibly? And then another one about that, do you know how many people are moving to, for example, Scotland for better funding, or even inside London just to get the better funding?
We don't have numbers, but we definitely see it anecdotally. I mean, you know, people do get in touch and say, I mean, one of the things that people do in London, which is really interesting, is a lot of people say that they need a GP near to their work. So people say, oh, I'm working in central London, and obviously I have to have a local doctor close to where I'm working. So people are able to do that. So they'll register with a GP nearer to where they're able to access treatment. So we see quite a lot of that, people moving. Definitely happens very regularly. But then, of course, their concern is policies change sometimes, and you may move from one place to another and then discover that actually where you are has suddenly cut funding, which can be really frustrating. In terms of patients going abroad, absolutely, definitely, that's something we see all the time. And it's, you know, there's no data on that. There's no people often don't tell anyone at all what they're doing. So we don't know how many people are doing that. But it is clear from our forums and from talking to people that more and more patients do that. And we're quite strict about single embryo transfer in the UK. And one of the things we try to really explain to clinical commissioning groups is that if people go somewhere where they come back with a multiple pregnancy, any savings they've made from cutting IVF services can very quickly be lost in terms of antenatal care and postnatal care for babies who are born very prematurely. So I think it's really important that we try to explain to them they need to join those things up. You know, our regulated system has a lot of benefits, actually, but I don't think when they're commissioning treatment, they're always thinking that far ahead.
True. I just noticed that probably our other speakers don't have access to the Q&A. So do you have any questions to Kate? Anybody? No? Okay, thank you so much for joining us, Kate, even though you are not at your best health at the moment. So we thank you very much and wish you all the best for this day.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to have to leave early, but thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the last, but definitely not the least speaker, who is Michael Hughes, who is joining us from Australia. He gives a glimpse into the male infertility in his blog at marriedandchildless.com. He's also a presenter on the Full Stop podcast and World Childless Week champion. Michael is passionate about sharing stories so that other men are encouraged to get support for their mental health when living with involuntary childlessness. His power work so far has led to new conversations for men who would otherwise have stayed silent. We are very happy and honored to hear his experiences with the title, What Next? Michael.
Oh, thank you. Wow, I'm quite humbled to be in such privileged company. I'm just an ordinary guy, and here I am in a European webinar. So, look, firstly, I'd like to thank Fertility Europe for inviting me to talk. I identify as a childless person, well, childless not by choice person. And I'd like to talk to you about what next if fertility treatment is not a success. And of course, you're listening to that through the voice of a man. Now, before I start, it's traditional down here that I tell you that I'm coming from the traditional home of the Dharawal people here in Australia, and I pay my respects to the leaders, both past, present, and those emerging. And also, although I'm coming from the cis male perspective, I want to recognise the LGBTQI members of the childless community. And although I cannot speak for them, I know that what I'm about to discuss will resonate with them. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with the term childless not by choice, it is the general term that we use for those who dearly wanted to be parents, but the choice was taken away from them. And there are many ways that that happens, and fertility issues is one of many. So as Satu said, I am one half of a childless marriage. I'm 1/3 of a childless podcast, a World Childless Week ambassador, and also with a man in the UK by the name of Andy Harrod. We started a online peer support group for childless men because there is a myth that men don't care. And I can tell you, as the custodian of nearly 300 personal stories, that is not true. But more about that later. So a little about me and my wife, or my wife and I should say. So I told you I was an ordinary guy. We first met when we were 16, and we had shared dreams about spending a life together and having a family, and it was a very powerful thing. My wife had a very traumatic childhood, and she saw the ability to have children, to have a family, as a way of fixing that, of not passing that generational trauma on. Whereas I had a idyllic childhood in the Essex countryside. Actually, I'm originally born in the UK, And we thought together we would be brilliant parents. Now, into our late teens, early 20s, we were told that we would need help. But we were very naive, very uneducated, and had absolutely no idea what that meant. We now know that Vicky had polycystic ovary syndrome. And then we found out later on that my sperm are not Olympic swimmers, so they were very slow. So it was a bit of a double whammy. But we got married at 25, and that's when we thought, right, it's now time to have children. And to cut a very long story short, we tried for 15 years and we jumped through every fertility treatment that was on offer for us in terms of, with the end being IVF. There was no donation available then for us, that type of treatment. But so when I talk, I will be talking about, when I say IVF, colloquially down here, assisted reproduction technology will be known as IVF. So sorry for that Australianism, but that's the way it is. But of course it wasn't a success for us. And just like having children has a profound effect on someone's life, not having children that you dearly wanted has an extremely profound effect on your life. And so one of those is that when you start to have treatment, there will be something they call the friendship apocalypse, because all your friends are around about the same age, and they are having children very, very easily, and you're not. And there becomes this uncomfortableness that actually drives people apart from their friends, and also the childless. Well, we're not childless then, but you also, as a coping mechanism, you withdraw from everyday life because you're obviously going through treatment that is for us was absolutely encompassed everything in our life. When we look back at that 15 years, we realised that our life was on hold for 15 years. And I think that's something that Mariana mentioned, that it feels like we don't have any control, and that's exactly how it feels. And it's almost like you've lost 15 years of your life. And so, yeah, and part of the coping mechanism is to withdraw. And so the childless people are hiding in plain sight, as again, I think Mariana mentioned, that we don't talk about, we don't talk about them. And so we develop these skills to hide in plain sight. And some people will be, well, we will say, oh, we didn't want children, when they really did. They may be that person that takes excuses themselves when there is a pregnancy announcement in a workplace, and you'll find them either in the bathroom or the stairwell releasing their grief. And I was able to talk to my workplace at a forum about being childless, and I had many people come back to me going, God, I didn't even realise that was a thing. Is that a thing? Childlessness? Really? So there is, I've just lost my train of thought, but I'll get back on my script. So one of the things that I want to talk about what next is not just about this dark place that we ended up in, but what next for the IVF industry. I will use that term. There's a growing statement in the childless community that the unsuccessful IVF treatments are like a toxic roller coaster of hope and despair. And again, I think Mariana touched on that, about how difficult this process is. you're filled with hope that, you know, this time it's going to work, this time it's going to work. So you keep trying. I mean, my wife, as an example, I've never seen her so focused and so driven to want something than in this IVF process, where I just was absolutely drained. I felt useless. I felt out of control because I couldn't fix this. And I just had to sit by and go through the motions of, you know, giving sperm samples to a doctor who would then, you know, fertilize an egg. But I couldn't take the pain away from my wife when it didn't work. And that was really, really hard to deal with. So and please excuse me, because this is still a bit hard to talk about, but I'm okay. Don't get me wrong. This is what I do. I just sometimes get a bit emotional. So what's next for the childless couple is not good news. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is a dark, dark place. And to compound this, and I'm talking for our experience here in Australia, I really hope it's different in Europe. But our experience at 40 was being told by the doctor, look, you've got to give up. This isn't going to work anymore. And we were set adrift by the industry to navigate what was and what still is an immense grief on our own. There was no care plan offered. We were already broken by the process. We were clinically depressed. And then now we had to navigate our way out of this dark place. And so, as I said, I really hope this has changed. But what I would like next for the IVF industry is to educate yourself on how profound not being able to have children is for those who experience it. Now, I know this is a bit provocative, but I can think of no other way of saying it, that you sell that dream, and it's incumbent on you to ensure that those who are not successful are cared for. Because every single one of those people will be damaged, some more than others. So, for instance, Berenice Smith, who is one of the co-presenters on the podcast that Sadhu mentioned in my intro, she was so damaged from an IVF journey that she was suicidal, and she's been very public about that. Now, we were lucky. We found a great therapist who had the lived experience of grief and loss. But we have many horror stories in the community where people have found a therapist who has absolutely no experience in how to deal with the childless. So they have, even in the clinical setting, they have heard statements like, oh, well, you dodged a bullet. You know, children aren't all that crack up to be. You know, it's hard work being a parent. And it's these type of comments that marginalise us even more. As I said, we feel isolated already. You know, we live in a society that's absolutely family focused. Every election, it's all about what the government can deliver for the family. And so in these therapeutic sessions, hearing things like I mentioned is absolutely soul destroying. And for those who are therapists, the what next for you, if you haven't already, is to educate yourself on the childless experience, because it is a profound grief journey and it touches every part of our lives. How we interact with our family, how we are disadvantaged in the workplace. So, for instance, have you ever heard of someone say, oh, look, you don't have children, so how about we give Christmas to those who have? What does that mean? I can't spend time with the family that I've got? And one of the other things is, as we grow older, without that family support network that is, that is inherent when you have children, we will be no one else's priority. And so, yeah, it touches every part of your life and for the lifespan. So the way that I like to think of this is that it's a grief that you manage through your entire life. Now, it gets easier to manage as time goes on with the right help. But the other lady who does the podcast with us, Sarah, she has had experience where a therapist has thrown a number of these very inappropriate remarks to her. As an example, well, why don't you just adopt? And that is something that really, really boils the blood of the childless, because we have gone through so much. We have thought of every way of trying to have a child, and what you don't think we thought about that. But for us and for many others, it is a process that we couldn't face. As I said, we were broken at the end of this. We were clinically depressed, and we just could not see. We were barely looking after ourselves, and so how could we go through such an invasive process of adoption? And then here in Australia, we have such a good welfare system that there are not many children to adopt. So, yeah. So what next for therapists is, please educate yourself on the childless experience. And for those who are watching this who will become childless, make sure you find the right person, because as Mariana said, it helps, and it helped us. So for us, it taught us how to talk about the right things. That's the way I explain it. And so about how we're feeling about each other, but in a non-emotive way. And it was absolutely invaluable for us. So I'm going to wrap up now by saying there is also a what next for the actual childless community itself. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. We are a community that realise if we want change, now we are going to have to instigate that change, and we are going to have to become visible, and together we can slowly raise awareness. And so this is where World Childless Week comes in. Its aim is to bring together the community and raise awareness about the many, many facets of being childless. And infertility is just one small one. This is why I'm part of this podcast, because it's our way of exploring what it means to be childless. And I bring that male voice to the conversation that is so needed, but I can tell you that it's so hard for men to talk about this, so hard, because there is so many emotions. There is anger, there is the feelings of failure that sit around this that I could talk about for ages, so I'll probably shut up now. But there is also work being performed on workplace inclusion by some in their community to try and overcome some of the disadvantages there. We have childless therapists. As I mentioned, Sarah, who was part of the podcast, she was so driven after being in an appropriate therapy session that she went, no, I'm going to become a therapist myself, and I'm going to make a difference. And there are many, many like that now. And there are many of us who are trying to make a difference in our own way. And that makes the childless community a warm, empathetic, and caring community that I believe is the gold standard of how humans should treat each other. And I believe the general population has a lot to learn from us. And I think that will do me.
Wow. I feel like I should applaud to you, Michael, because that was really touching. And being childless, not by choice myself with my husband, I totally 100% agree with everything you are saying. It is a lifelong thing. You will never get rid of it, but you just have to learn to live with it.
Yeah.
And in my association, what we are now facing is people like me, I'm over 50, facing the same thing again, because our friends are getting grandparents, grandchildren, and we are not doing that. So the whole thing starts all over again. So yeah, thank you so much for those words. Mariana, I'm sure you want to say something to Michael to answer some of his questions and what he's saying.
First of all, I'd like to thank him for sharing these thoughts, because it's, of course, we know it's difficult to talk about this because all the emotions are still there. So thank you. Very, very important to listen and to feel, because we felt what you were saying. So it's very, very important. Thank you for that. I think I have to say something about the therapist, because this is an issue that we discuss between therapists. So sometimes people think that psychologists do all the work. No, we can work with children, with adults, we can work with depression, we can work with serious mental health, and we can work in fertility and loss and cancer. And it's not like that, because in some areas there are specific issues that should be taken into account, and we have to have good training on specific topics to be able to address patients' needs. And I think what Michael was mentioning is that some therapists are not really prepared for the infertility experience and the childless experience. And we have this complaint from patients everywhere, that they went to a therapist that was someone that was not working in the field, and he did exactly what Michael said. They didn't validate the feelings. They were just saying, oh, it's okay, children are not that good, so we will be happy without them. And this is something that we are not supposed to do, definitely. Of course, we cannot have a list of people that you shouldn't go there, or people that, but if I can say something, I would say in this field, go to therapists that have experience on infertility, because the issues are very, very sensitive. The ability to empathize and be compassionate with the patients is something that we have to develop within this type of field. So not all psychologists or therapists or counselors will be highly competent and sensitive and empathic to patients in these situations. So try to find someone that is in the field, because at least you will know. I'm not sure if it's a therapist goes or not, but at least you have someone that is already prepared to deal with these specific emotions that arise in infertility. For example, the concept of grief, it's a concept that it's been under discussion, because usually you grieve because you lost something. And sometimes people, some therapists or other people tend to say, but they didn't lose anything, so they didn't have a child, so no child was born, so there was no loss. And they're not really understanding how many losses are involved in the field of in childless world, and how many, the amount of things that people are losing, even if they didn't have a child, because they are losing the future, the Christmas, the family environment, the playing, the etc., the grandchildren. So therapists really have to be prepared to be with these patients, and not all therapists can do this. So try to find therapists that are in this field.
I agree. Do we have any? Oh, sorry, there is something in the chat. Oh, there's a question for Michael. What specific strategy would you say would be helpful to lift the stigma about childlessness in general society? What do you think would have the most impact on making society aware, in addition to your podcast, for example? What can we do?
Well, that's a big question. Firstly, Bojana, I just want to say how happy I was to see your photographs of your of your children. That was so lovely to see. Look, I think it is incumbent on the childless community, really, because we need to get the message out there that childlessness is a thing. Unfortunately, I'm generalizing, but because the childless find it very hard to talk about this, the conversations sometimes get hijacked by, hijack's probably not the right word, but by those people that identify as child-free. Now, that is a legitimate way of existing in the world, and is their choice, and I have no problem with that. But yeah, I think overshadowed. I think the childless get overshadowed by this conversation. And so it is incumbent on us to find the strength to enlighten the rest of society, because unless in a recent Australian election, there was a statement by our new Prime Minister that said, if you're not seen, you're not counted. And so I take that away and think about the childless community. If we are not seen, then how can we be counted? How can we be looked at? How can we be researched? How can we go to government and say, look, we need special, not special treatment, but different treatment for when we age, because we're going to be a burden on the public purse as we grow old, because we don't have that other support network that normal families do. So I think it's incumbent on us, really. And I know some people will probably disagree with that, but yeah, I think it's incumbent on us as a strategy to be seen.
Yeah, I think that sounds really good. We have to make noise about childlessness too. Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. So that person that reached out to me at my work, I mean, they are a parent, and she was absolutely dumbfounded that is this actually a thing? It did not occur to her. So it's not that there's any I don't believe there's malice out there. It's just that people do not know.
Yeah. Well, that's why Fertility Europe exists. That's why national patient associations exist, and I know that you in Australia also have a patient association for infertility patients. So that's the work what they are doing. Do other panelists have any questions to each other, or unfortunately our time is running out? But I still have one question to Claudia about Fertility Europe. So what are your plans and strategy in order to make the situation for those 25 million people in Europe easier?
Well, first of all, this is an awareness campaign. You're in the middle of it, and I would like to share quickly a screen, if possible. May I?
Yes.
Am I screening?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're in the middle of the European Fertility Week. I've really asked you to join this campaign. It's about those 25 million people in Europe, and I'm sorry, Michael, that it's not addressing also the people in Australia. But maybe for the future, we can think of widening such a campaign. Gaps and barriers need to be addressed to tackle inequalities in the European Union. There are huge inequalities. This is why I ask you to join our campaign. This is one of the steps we are doing towards rising awareness about this topic in Europe. Actually, Fertility Europe has another big project called the Atlas, showing them a map of Europe with all the inequalities. And with this, we address and do advocacy work at the European Union. I was personally invited 2 days ago to the European Parliament in person to have a roundtable discussion regarding issues also connected to infertility. And this topic is really recognized and rising. What our future plans are to make a working group within the European Union which is addressing infertility and also including childlessness. This is part of the infertility journey. There are several paths, we know that are completely different ways and with different outcomes, we know. And what we noticed also through this roundtable is that it's not only a European problem, yeah? This is not only a European issue. It's the same in the USA, it's the same in China, it's the same in Asia, Australia, we heard. So we have it all over the world. So this is why we'll not stop here. Fertility Europe is doing great work and a lot of work in this field, and we really would like to address this topic further. And we are also trying to get the patients to have a seat at this very table, not only the physicians and not only the psychologists and not only the politicians, but the patients and the people who need fertility treatment. So this is where we are heading to.
Indeed, that's what we've been doing
and
for 13 years now.
So you can follow easily through our campaign. Sorry, Satu, for interrupting.
Yes,
Let's stop sharing now.
Yeah, okay. And do share our materials, even in Australia, Michael, if you want to. That's very important. Unfortunately, like I said, our time is running out. We still have message from Mr. Arłukowicz, who unfortunately had to leave already. But Anita, you were the messenger.
Hello, yes, yes, MEP Arłukowicz asked to apologize to you all, but he's at another meeting. I mean, he's, whoever follows Mr. Arłukowicz on his social media can see that he's been practicing being at least 2 places at the same time for quite a few years now. And so sometimes we have to help him. But he would like to thank us all for everything that was said here today. Ask to be updated on anything that he should know and remember for the future. It's the picture of Europe seen with the eyes of people with infertility is not great. There is still a lot of inequalities with the access to treatment. There are faulty policies, insufficient financing, and or lack of it. There is lack of education about fertility and stigmatization of people that are infertile or people who involuntary childless. So as we're making the joint front of doctors with representation of Carlos here in Esra, psychologists and patients, together with the policymakers like Mr. Arłukowicz himself, we need to change the situation. We need to make sure that on the European level and on the national level, the patients have the right to safe, effective, and equal treatment of infertility. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anita. Claudia, do you want to say something before we end, or?
Once again, thank you very much for all the audience being here and being so patient, for all the panelists showing their experiences and their work. I really think that this common voice we all have in the same direction is a great support for this issue. So finger crossed that next year, this time, we have a better situation, for example, for at least the patients in Europe. Yeah. So once again, thank you, and thanks again for the partners who made this all possible. And once again, thank you to Mr. Arłukowicz. Please, Anita, tell him our thanks. This is all for now. I would like to close this session. And thank you, Satu, for moderating it. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. And I would also like to thank all the speakers. It was wonderful to hear your presentations, and just thank you so much for helping us to build this event.
Okay, my pleasure.
And have a nice European Fertility Week. It's still continuing until Sunday.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invite.
Bye-bye.